Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in Putney Vale Cemetery, London. And this cross here is part of the headstone of Alexander Kerensky. He was born in 1881 in Kazan, Russia, and he died in the United States in 1970. His father was, he was taught by Lenin's father. So, because Lenin also spent some time in Kazan and Simbirsk. So Kerensky qualified as a lawyer, and he joined the Socialist Revolutionaries, which was then an underground political party. And they really were revolutionary. They wanted to overthrow the Tsar by force of arms and bring in a socialist society. Unlike the Russian Social Democratic and Labour Party, the Socialist Revolutionaries believed that the peasantry would be the revolutionary class in Russia, since they comprised something like 80% of the populace at the time. So Kerensky spent much of his time in St. Petersburg, and Tsarist officials were assassinated by his organization. It was the 1985 revolution in which he participated. But fast forward to February 1917, the First World War was raging. There were these massive protests at the Putilov steelworks in St. Petersburg, then called Petrograd. And this was the factory which had, I suppose, partly sparked off the 1905 revolution. Anyhow, so they seized power. Briefly, Prince Lvov was prime minister after the Tsar abdicated. Lvov was a constitutional Democrat. They chose to continue fighting, but the war was going very badly indeed for Russia. And Kerensky then became prime minister. As a socialist, he thought he'd have a broader appeal. The Soviet was set up in Petrograd as in a council of councils. There were factories workers and their own councils, tramway workers and soldiers and sailors and so forth. And Kerensky had the incredibly difficult job of trying to fight this war on a full scale, despite discipline breaking down. And even in his capital city, his writ didn't really run. And the various political parties on the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolsheviks became increasingly influential. Won't go into all the twists and turns of his story, but there was the June days when the Bolsheviks tried to oust him. They were defeated. Lenin fled to Finland. Then there was the Kornilov coup, late August into early September 1917, when General Lavr Kornilov returned from the front, attempting to seize power. Was he just a nascent military dictator? Did he want to restore the Tsar? Was he duped by Kerensky or the Bolsheviks, or what? We're never going to quite get to the bottom of that. But anyway, the October Revolution 1917, Kerensky was ousted. It's really November according to our Gregorian calendar, but Russia used the Julian calendar at that time. So Kerensky had to flee Petrograd in a car provided by the US Embassy. And he later moved to the United States, where he worked as an academic, and he was increasingly an irrelevant figure. Reflecting on his political career later, he thought that his cardinal error had been not to recognize land seizures by the peasants, say, all right, you legally own it. He wanted to organize it properly after the war. Well, the other thing was obviously to make peace with the Central Powers, with Germany, Austria-Hungary, and so on, because he said it put a tremendous strain on the government when they were in a very difficult situation. The war was deeply impossible, seemed to be unwinnable. There were severe food and fuel shortages. The army was deserting and mutinying. And he said to a colleague, if we'd made peace with Germany, we would be sitting in St. Petersburg now. But it wasn't to be. So he died in 1970. But his only other return to the newspapers was in 1941, when the Soviet Union was invaded by the Third Reich. And he contacted Stalin, said, let bygones be bygones. I will do anything for the defense of the motherland. What can I do to help? Can I raise a legion of Russian emigres here in the United States to come back and defend our homeland? Stalin never bothered to reply. Perhaps surprising that Stalin didn't winkle into coming to the Soviet Union and just have him shot. But that was Kerensky. When he was finally called to his reward in 1970, the Russian Orthodox Church in the United States refused to conduct his funeral, would not let him be buried in ground consecrated by them, since he had been partly responsible for the disestablishment of the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia. He'd been the Minister for Justice in the Provisional Government in 1917, prior to becoming Prime Minister. So he's buried here in Putney Vale. Why here? Of all the places he could have been buried, he could have been buried in other cemeteries. Did he have a Russian Orthodox funeral pass? I don't know, because there is a Russian Orthodox church abroad, and there are other members of the Kerensky family interred beside him. So this is where he finds eternal rest. Fascinatingly, it's only written in English there, not in Cyrillic. And someone's put a 10 ruble coin on his grave. I'm not quite sure why. It wasn't me. So it's staggering to think that only 6 feet below me it was a very important historical figure. So Putney Vale Cemetery is an enormous cemetery in southwest London, near Wimbledon Common, and some very distinguished persons find eternal repose here, or indeed have been cremated, including Clementine Churchill, née Hosier. That's the wife of Sir Winston Churchill. So do walk around. It's atmospheric, it's very well kept, it's quiet, it's well back from the road, and it's a place of placid meditation. So Putney Vale Cemetery, don't miss it.